Hey everybody, George Coors here, and today I've got a special one for you. We're going to talk in depth about James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. But before you leave here and be like, I'm never going to read Finnegan's Wake, I'm going to spend the first part of the video attempting to demystify this novel in a manner which I hope aids you in your reading. Okay? So for those of you who have not read Finnegan's Wake, stick around because I want to encourage you to give it a shot in a couple of different manners, and I'm going to try to unpack some of the ways that I might encourage you to think about this novel in particular and how it might be more approachable for you. Okay, so stick around, please, because we're going to get into this, and it's going to be its own thing. It's a notorious novel for a reason, but stick around because I really, really think that this is an important work just to consider in a variety of different ways. In the literary tradition, of course. So I just want to encourage you to stick around, especially if you have not read it. The whole video, I think, will be a great resource. And what I'm hoping to accomplish here is being that resource for you to try and facilitate an easier reading for you. Because let me just start off by saying with this novel, and I'll show you all the notes I've taken here. Oh, let me start at the beginning here. That I picked up this novel probably 12 or 13 years ago. And over the intervening 12 or 13 years, I have just been picking up this novel and occasionally reading a snippet out of it, 5, 10 pages. And it is such a huge work. It's got so much going on in terms of the typesetting for the time. It's got so much going on in terms of wordplay that I would just pick it up occasionally, maybe on Bloom's Day or maybe on St. Patrick's Day, or just thinking about Joyce and thinking about experimentation and in my own writing practice and trying to get there. I would pick up this novel and just read a bit of it. And that, I think, for those of you out there who have not read the novel, who maybe you have a copy of this on the shelf, I think that is a very reasonable practice to get into, because over the past decade, I've had a wonderful time delving into this novel just in those snippets like that and getting a general experience of the language, the wordplay, and just the sort of depth that Joyce gets into here with Finnegan's Wake. And I think that is a reasonable way for you to go about it. If you're really intimidated by it, if you're really not in the place where like, hey, I want to commit some time to reading this from beginning to end, and I'm using air quotes there for big reasons. I think that is reasonable to just pick it up off the shelf and read a page. Read the pages out loud. Let yourself feel a little bit of that play with language and experimentation with language, because that is what's so special about this. In terms of what I would say to demystify this, the first and biggest thing, if you're actually like, okay, I've spent some time thinking about it, I've spent some time reading it, maybe I've learned a little bit about it, from various resources on the web or wherever you're at. Maybe if you haven't read anything at all about it. The biggest and first suggestion I have for you is to suspend this very American sort of obsession with reading comprehension that we have. And a lot of us learned this in school with various reading tests. What percentage of the text did you understand? And I find a lot of readers sacrifice the chance at engaging in some real significant art for the discomfort that comes with maybe not understanding everything in the text. And I see that with Finnegan's Wake, of course this happens, but I see this all the time with a wide variety of other novels, and especially novels that employ like stream of consciousness or experimentation with form. I've seen this a lot with Virginia Woolf, with Thomas Pynchon, Juan Rulfo with Pedro Paramo, for example, Samuel Beckett. The list goes on. And I really want to encourage you to sort of pause that obsession with reading comprehension that we have here and understand that we're engaging in a piece of high art, and that we, as readers, are sometimes not always meant to understand every single thing that's happening. That is the case with countless novels, and that is especially the case here with Finnegan's Wake. So I know that might be uncomfortable in our reading practice to do because we want to do best by the writer and understand most of what the writer says. And that is a noble and good intent. You're coming from a right place. But an over-reliance on that is going to prevent you from reading this entirely. If you are obsessed with, hey, I didn't understand that, and that bothers you, I think trying to give yourself some grace and some space in your reading practice that, you might not understand everything. And don't be so arrogant as to think that you're going to pick up every book and understand it. And, that's something that all of us have to deal with, is that presumption of expertise. Hey, I've read all this. I've done all this. I have all this experience. I'm going to understand this. It's okay that you don't. And with Finnegan's Wake, you won't. And that's one of the really egalitarian things about Finnegans Wake that I think is really important, is that even folks who have spent their entire lives devoting themselves in a scholarly capacity to this novel do not understand everything that is going on in here. And that makes it a novel for everyone. If nobody understands the thing in its totality, that means that everybody is approaching it from that place of, well, what is going on here? And that is actually really good, I think. I think that for, when it comes to engaging in art is a really great place, because it's not like we're dealing with a text like War and Peace, for example, where a scholar of, a certain kind of European history or a certain kind of Russian history might have a really different reading than, one of us regular folks on the street who doesn't have a PhD in that particular subject field. So we're kind of approaching this, to my mind, in a art is for everybody kind of manner, and let yourself have fun with it. That's the other thing that I want to encourage you, is that Joyce, of a lot of our more serious art-focused novelists, has a significant sense of humor. Unlike maybe if we're doing a reading of 3 novels by Samuel Beckett, for example, there's a lot of play in here that is really obviously play. And it's going to be obvious to most readers how much pun and sort of silliness goes on in here. And that's also the case with a lot of Joyce's other work, with Ulysses, for example. So give yourself some grace, all right? We're not here to read Finnegans Wake to understand it 100%, but we can get some cool stuff out of the reading of this, all right? And I think I really, really would recommend a lot more people reading this. And I want to demystify it because I do think it should be read by more people. Folks kind of treat Finnegans Wake as, oh, I'm never going to read it situation. And I think that's a bummer, because there's so much going on here just in terms of how we can experience language, how we can experience narrative, that I think is really cool. So think about that. In terms of further, more granularly sort of demystifying what's going on here with Finnegans Wake, some helpful things I might point out. First off, we're going to expect, as readers here, a lot of transposition. And I mean that in the sense of swapping out letters, intentional misspellings, spelling a word as the cognate is spelled, so as a similar sounding word is spelled, and switching that out. And that is a big part of what goes into a lot of the language play here. And I would say that transposition that you're seeing, that's one of our sort of cornerstones of the experimentation that Joyce is engaging with here, because I think that is a really productive way that Joyce is using to build ambiguity in the text. So by taking a word and spelling it slightly differently, or using maybe a foreign cognate from a different language in that particular spelling of the word, that is going to lead us to that multiple understandings of the same word. And I think that is done a ton here, time and time again. Wow. Joyce just is grasping at all these different spellings and alterations of words. And that could get really confusing, but it's also really cool if you just sit there and watch the talent of this man and how he is sort of delving into all of this language, right? Another thing that we're seeing time and time again in Finnegans Wake is word combination. So combining different words together in order to form a new word. And this is most famously done with the thunder words, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later, which are like these sort of extremely long words that come up 10 times throughout the text. And this combination we see happening again, combining two words, and then we get a more complicated meaning from the combination of the two of them. And then another sort of language play thing that we have here is pun. Time and time again, Joyce is making puns off of spelling, off of how a word sounds, off of how a word looks in another language. So we're seeing just over and over again that humor exercised in pun. Rhyme as well. We're seeing rhyme constantly used throughout here. And then repetition. Things in 2s, 3s, 4s, that multiple significant numbers might come through there in a couple of different ways as well. So there is something that is helpful for you as a reader if you are a fan of like puzzles where you read jumbled letters and you make a solution out of a jumble of letters. What is I've heard called typoglycemia, and I will put a little resource about typoglycemia down below, where you're able to read what possible word comes from a jumble. That being able to do that is really helpful in a text like this. The other thing that I would say is really important and can be really helpful for folks is sounding it out and reading the text aloud. I think that is probably my number one recommendation if you're new to Finnegan's Wake, or if you are having trouble with it, is to read the text out loud and give yourself a little bit of that space to just hear what's going on here, hear the language play, appreciate the language play in a different way than just in your head. And you might glean more from that and from this sort of intertextuality that's going on here if you do so. Because I think at the end of the day, what I think is so confounding about Finnegan's Wake is the word play, is the language play. And I have heard readers claim that Joyce invented a new language. And I'm here to say he did not. He did not invent a new language. That is not what is going on here. Now, did he coin new words in the process of writing Finnegan's Wake? Yes, I would say so. I would say from a linguistics perspective, yes. But from a linguistics perspective, did he invent a new syntax? Did he invent a new morphology? Did he invent new semantics? I would not say so. Did he evolve the use of the English language to such a point that it has changed its syntax and morphology and semantics and phonology? I would not say so. There's a lot of language play here, and there is a lot of coinage as well that's going on here, where we're seeing new words being created, and I think that is absolutely overwhelming to read in the kind of length that we have here, especially later on in the text when we start getting into section 2.2 here, where we've got all sorts of notes all over the page. I think this is for me, it was the most challenging chapter in the entirety of the text. But you're reading and bouncing back and forth between all of these different sections that have been typeset in various manners. And this can get really complicated. But just remind yourself as a reader, remind yourself as you're going through here that, hey, we're dealing with extensive language play here, and that is just important grounding for us as readers to accept that our reading may not be and probably should not be considered authoritative. This going back to that reading comprehension thread, I think one of the biggest things that we probably need to do to demystify a novel like Finnegan's Wake and to get yourself to the point where you're reading it is understanding that our read of it is not necessarily going to be authoritative or have authority, and that might be intentional. That might be something that Joyce is thinking of when experimenting with language to the extent that is done in this work. And that is also something that we can greatly appreciate as readers in our unpacking and movement through this novel. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that I use to read through the novel. But first, as we're sort of getting into more of the novel and away from this demystification, let me tell you a little bit more of my strategy here. So, as I said, for about the last decade plus, I have just been taking Finnegan's Wake off the shelf and reading a few pages of it. And I do think that is valid. I think that's a reasonable way to approach a work like this. Just to appreciate it as a work of art, I think you can do that, pulling it off the shelf, just engaging with it a little bit. For me, one of the things that I did is, it's very famously a circular novel where, when we start at the beginning here, we don't have a capital letter. Clearly, we're mid-sentence. And then if we go all the way to the end of the text, we realize that we're ending on a fragment. So we can read the first sentence and the last sentence sort of together, right? We might start with the last sentence and then read to the first sentence. And a couple of times I've just done that, started on the last few pages and then read into the first few pages. To sort of get an idea for this circular recursive novel idea that Joyce is going after here. In this reading, when I decided, okay, well, I've got the time, I'm ready to sort of dig into this as a more significant reading from beginning to end, which, it's a circular novel, so what is the beginning, what is the end? One might, not be able to sort of make a good judgment of that outside of where it is physically in the text. I decided to read the first 100 pages just as is, with very little commentary, and then from then on, after the first few chapters, I read it with annotations. And I read it with annotations from the web, which I'm going to post down below, which is called Finnegansweb, which is a resource that everybody can have access to. And then I also used this, which is Joseph Campbell's A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake. And this was a very helpful text. It's one of the first texts published unpacking what is going on in Finnegan's Wake. So I used this as my primary annotation. Folks, probably some scholars, if there are Joyce scholars out there watching this, they're going to say that this is a little outdated. If you get a newer edition of this, there is commentary sort of correcting the erroneous claims made in here. So don't worry about that. But to me, this was also a good historical document because it was one of the first major sets of annotations published about Finnegan's Wake. I'm going to get to those a little bit more in a second. But that is to say, if you want to read it with annotations, I think you can. I think I also really enjoyed reading it without the annotations and just sounding things out and going through and experiencing that language play. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was really fun, right? Because it sort of lets you play with the language by sounding it out and sort of seeing what meaning you can get from it, I think was really, really cool. So instead of talking at this point about plot, which that's another thing that I think we're going to have to pause that button on. If you're not a person who can hang with a novel that doesn't have a really moving plot, there is a lot of plot in here. But I would say if it's difficult for you to get into a novel that isn't like really plot focused, Finnegan's Wake might be tough to get into in that sense. But I'm going to talk about some themes that you might look for throughout your reading that I think could be cool and might sort of give you this general way to sort of get more from the text. The first I would recommend is our thunder words. And thunder and the thunder words appear 10 times throughout the text, and thunder appears numerous other times throughout the text. And if you just look for that, you're probably in a somewhat significant passage in the text. And the first one does appear on the first page here. You see it is quite long. And these long words, these thunder words, which are these word combinations of thunder or thunder-like words or culturally related thunder words from different languages, they appear 10 times throughout the text. And that's something just to keep an eye out for, is what's something going on here, because those thunder words often appear around some kind of action in the text. So they might be a good clue for you to sort of contextually look around. Okay, what's happening here? Why is the thunder word appearing in this particular section? That's one that's like on page 1 that you can go to and start reading for and taking a look at when you're going through here. The next one, which is major, are the two parent figures. So there are like 4 major characters, and the two of them, which are parents, are Alp and HCE. Alp is the mother, Anna Livia Plurabelle, and HCE, Humphrey Chimpden Earwicker, is the father. Here's what you need to do when you're looking for the parent figures in the text, is look for ALP, look for HCE. This might be a string of words. One starts with A, one starts with L, one starts with P. It might be like subtle in that manner throughout the text. Same with HCE. One word that starts with H, the next word starts with C, the next word starts with E. Take a special eye out for that, because you're going to find throughout the text Alp and HCE are going to be appearing constantly. And that's another thing to sort of think about here, because a major through line in the novel is the relationship between these two individuals, between the mother and the father. It has this sort of almost mythical origin story feeling to it. And it comes up time and time again as we're dealing with the hundreds, if not thousands of themes that go throughout the text here. So time and time again, when maybe if you're reading with annotations and you notice, we're delving into Christian mythology here, or Irish mythology, or power dynamics, or whatever is happening on that particular page, I would really encourage you to keep an eye out for those three letters, ALP, and then also HCE. Take special care for that. And you're going to start noticing those parent figures coming up time and again. Their relationship is a big part of the text. The relationship between the two parents, their love for each other, their love for their children, their sexual relationship, their history is throughout this text a major, major part of what's going on in Finnegan's Wake. The next set of characters I would encourage you to sort of look out for and watch out for are Shem and Sean, and this has to do with the eternal brother conflict. Shem and Sean being these two characters who are the two sons of Alp and HCE. They come up throughout the text as well, and they are often engaged in this sort of duality where they are almost a yin and yang to each other. They both possess maybe the characteristics of HCE, of the father, but they possess only half. The inverse half of the other. And that brother conflict, that sort of yin and yang moment, is throughout the text. So whenever you're seeing Shem, or whenever you're seeing Sean, the other is right around the corner somewhere, or the scene is the two of them together, and possibly Izzy the sister as well is in there. That brother conflict comes up time and time again here. It is a huge part of the text, and it is sort of this like telling of world history that you might see a lot of scholars talk about with Finnegan's Wake, where there's just references to untold numbers of historical events, religious or political ideations and mythologies. That all is coming in through a wide variety of these different relationships that are, sort of expounded upon in the text. And the parent relationship between Alp and HCE and the brother conflict between Shem and Sean, those are two that come to my mind as being two of the most significant that you might look out for. So keep an eye out for the family as you're going through here. And one other thing about the two brothers, about Shem and Sean, that I would say here, and this might be helpful for, when we're considering reading with annotations, is the names for Shem and Sean do change quite a bit throughout the text. Now, I would just point out that they might rhyme with Shem or Sean, or they might be spelled similarly, or there might be some sort of intertextual relatedness here that might lead us to that. But if you're going through with annotations or resources, you will be able to, scholars have been able to parse out, okay, this is Sean in this chapter, this is Shem in this chapter, and so on. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Their names are going to change throughout. And just like, with Alp, we're looking for ALP, we're going to keep an eye out for those brothers with the names changing and seeing where they're at. those, if you just read, knowing that you're looking for HCE and Alp, knowing that you're looking for Shem and Sean, and looking for Thunder words, those, you're going to have a really productive time in the text, because you're going to be able to go through and get into a lot of the material here, and try to glean some stuff out. Really try to get some stuff out of here. I think that's a big thing. Some other themes that I might think of that you might sort of more occasionally throughout the text see that might be helpful when you're just looking for some meaning, some understanding in the text. One would be Adam and Eve, and origins of mythology, mythological origins. Adam and Eve, of course, appear very famously on the first page, just like the Thunder word does. That's a big signifier. Hey, look for this. Adam and Eve, both individually and together, appear throughout the text. Another thing is the name Finnegan, or a play on the title, Finnegan's Wake. So you may see like Finn McCool Awakens, right? We're seeing a play on the title. Plays on the title come up all the time. I was personally taking notes on the plays on the title, and I found quite a few of them. So I'm sure that there's many more out there, but that's another sort of item that we can look at to try and understand some material in the text. Another is tree and stone. Tree and stone as symbols. And these two washerwomen who are talking about HCE and Alp's relationship, they turn into tree and stone at one point in the text. And we see tree and stone used as symbolism throughout the text. That might be another more subtle one that I might look for, but that could be a productive one as well. And then finally, the last one that I would say would be Ireland and items related to Irish history. If you know a little bit about Irish history, if you know a little bit about Irish culture, that would be something I would keep an eye out. Dublin, alternate names for Dublin, Guinness Brewery, anything you know related to Irish literature, Irish geography, Irish political history, that is probably going to come up in some way, and that's some knowledge that is going to be very helpful for you. Now, here's, you might be, deep into this deep dive with me here, and you're like, okay, but what am I going to get from it? And that's where I think the resources are helpful. I think Finnegansweb would be a really great way to go through some annotations. And Finnegansweb is actually really nice, interlinked. It has everything hyperlinked, so you can go through and you can find the page you're on, click through on a particular phrase, and see, what have others made of this. It's set up like a wiki, so it can and still is edited by all sorts of people, and you can edit it. If you find yourself, hey, I'm an expert on Finnegan's Wake, all of a sudden, okay, well, you can start editing and going through things. Now, my main resource that I was using while reading Finnegan's Wake was Joseph Campbell's Skeleton Key. Now, like I said, this is one of the first items that was published regarding Finnegan's Wake. So I came at it as interested in possibly looking at this as a more historical document. Now, I will say this. There are other scholarly works that are considered more authoritative than this about Finnegan's Wake. And that is to your discretion to decide if that is for you. The way that Skeleton Key works is really unique, though, and I want to highlight it because I do think that it is really, really interesting the way that this almost retelling is laid out. And the way that works is in each of these chapters, as you're going through here, you're going to see that Campbell and also Henry Morton Robinson, who comments on the text, retell Finnegan's Wake in a more understanding fashion. And what you're doing here, what I would recommend with Skeleton Key is, if you want to use it, read a section or multiple sections of Finnegan's Wake and then go back and read Skeleton Key. Because what Campbell is trying to do, and then Robinson many years later when he's commenting with more contemporary up-to-date material on Finnegan's Wake, is trying to retell Finnegan's Wake in plainer language so that way you can have a greater understanding of what's going on here. And this is it. I say it's like a retelling. It's like a scholarly retelling because there's a lot of commentary on the text in terms of what's going on here, in terms of trying to make readers understand many of the intertextual references. But I think that this is a really interesting work because it basically retells the work of Finnegan's Wake in what attempts to be a much more understandable phraseology and much more understandable language. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of claims about the plot and text in here that I think is really, really interesting. So if you're absolutely befuddled and you need a little bit more of that plot, you need a little bit more of that texture when it comes to understanding exactly what is happening throughout the narrative, I think a skeleton key might be a really great resource for you. And I would say that any reading of this, I would maybe try to take with a grain of salt. And you'll see there's commentary from Henry Morton Robinson that's in here, and in the introduction, in the more contemporary versions of this, and the newer versions of this, Robinson comments like, "Hey, there's some stuff that Joseph Campbell claimed that was incorrect. That scholars have since, changed their opinion on." And that's important to watch out for here. But I would just say this with anybody who's like Campbell trying to claim an authoritative reading of Finnegan's Wake, is just take it with a little grain of salt. We talk time and time again, reading is subjective, reading a novel is subjective, our feelings about it, our understanding, of course, yes. But with Finnegan's Wake, it's such a complicated novel in terms of how language is played with, that I think experiencing language play in that manner might be more rewarding than trying to have an authoritative read of plot. And I'm being a little reductive there, and I think some folks at some universities might be upset to have me say that. But at the end of the day, I don't know that we're reading Finnegan's Wake to, get a really good handle on what the plot is. Sure, it's a great puzzle to tease out, but I think we're frequently reading Finnegan's Wake to see what a person can push our language to do. It's not a short novel, to say the least. It's over 600 pages long, and we're looking at it here just to see, in my case, how far can a novelist take this language that they use? To what extent can that language be pushed? And us really have it still be considered language, have it still be considered a novel. To me, in my background in linguistics, I consider language successful, I use that word hesitantly, when it's mutually intelligible. And frequently in that case, James Joyce's Finnegans Wake does not meet that threshold. But if we take some time and a little patience, maybe read it out loud, maybe understand its intertextuality, or understand some of the references or the other languages being referenced here and used here, then I might see it start to meet that threshold. But the kind of experimentation that we're seeing in Finnegans Wake is really pushing a language to the brink, to that point where what do we see when we don't understand anything anymore? And that experience as a reader, I think, is really good for you. I think it's really good, for me as a novelist, to be presented with a work that leaves me with so many questions. You folks have probably heard me say this on the channel. I think a good novel leaves you with more questions than it does answers. I think that is what good art does. And that threshold is met significantly by Finnegans Wake, maybe more than most other texts I've ever read. That being said, if you're coming at it from a less abstract sense, or maybe you just need to scratch that itch of understanding what's going on here in a more nuanced way, I think the skeleton key is a perfectly reasonable way to do that. Just as I think Finnegansweb is. If you want to have just annotations that you can go and sort of look at an individual phrase or sentence and see, okay, what does this particular section of the sentence mean? Finnegansweb is fantastic for that. And if you want to have, a really concise way for you to go through and really be able to, understand some of the stuff that's going on here, I think the Skeleton Key is a great resource. Now, like I said, this is one of the older texts published annotating Finnegan's Wake. So in the interim, there's been a lot more scholarship about it. There has been a ton of material written, and there's other much more authoritative works that scholars have put out annotating Finnegan's Wake. But because of the way that this sort of reworks the narrative and retells the narrative, is, I think, for readers of the Wake, very provocative. A very interesting way for us to approach it. Overall, my general feeling about Finnegan's Wake is that I think it's a really cool novel to experience. I think it's just fun. It's really fun to see an artist go beyond what we can imagine as being possible with a work. And I think this is, Finnegan's Wake is one of those novels that to me shows you just how unique a medium can be. We talk about frequently in popular culture, is this novel filmable? And a lot of my fellow novelists have the goal of making a novel that's filmed. That way they can just make a ton of money off of it, right? And with Finnegan's Wake, we are seeing a complete rejection of anything and everything that makes this translated into a different form. You cannot have Finnegan's Wake as a painting, a sculpture, a film, a score, any of it. It is not possible because Joyce is using language in the form of the novel to such an enormously abstract, extent that it is just something that probably isn't very likely to happen. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful to read. In your reading practice, I think that is a worthy and well earned challenge, is engaging in those novels that really push us to say, what is going on here? I also think, for me, as a person obsessed with language, as a novelist, I think Joyce is doing something deeply ancient in Finnegan's Wake. This mashing together of languages, that is where, I don't see Joyce inventing language here. I don't see that. But I see Joyce pushing languages, pushing linguistic conventions together in such a manner that we are it's almost like languages running up against each other and coming into that conflict. And this is how our languages actually evolve. This is how when communities, different linguistic communities, interact with each other peacefully or often not, they begin to, through that social conflict, begin to absorb the language of the other, and their own language and their own linguistic capabilities change accordingly, right? Not capabilities, conventions. Their own linguistic conventions change accordingly. So, the Norman Conquest, all of a sudden the English language starts getting a lot of French in it, for example. We see this time and again, in Spain, the Arabic conquest of Spain, we start seeing Spanish has started having all sorts of conventions from Arabic, so on and so forth. And that, I see this sort of butting of heads of languages throughout the text where we're combining those words, the misspelling, the transposition of spelling, really is quite interesting. And to me, another sort of linguistic aspect of it that I think is really provocative is hearing it versus seeing it on the page. Orthography, printed material, this is an abstract representation of language, right? That is not necessarily what language itself is. It is a system that we create to represent language to somebody else. So, hearing Finnegan's Wake read to you versus seeing it on the page, those are two distinct experiences. Which is why I think for our new readers to the Wake, I think it's a really good idea for you to read it out loud and to start to appreciate just the levels of ambiguity that we're having here. Because if you read it and you did not see the particular spelling of something, you might have a different understanding of the ambiguity of that meaning than if you were looking at the page. This might sound overwhelming to you. And if you've stuck with me from the beginning, I just want to say it's well worth your time. It is. It really is. And I think that there are plenty of novelists and scholars who are going to say it's not worth your time. It's just gobbledygook. And there's plenty of individuals who are going to say that. And I'm sure there's plenty of people watching this now who are going to say that. And that's fine. I accept that is where you might come from. But if you are in your reading practice in a place where you like experimentation, where you like seeing language played with, where you like to see what language can do, I think Finnegan's Wake is a novel that you should be reading. It's definitely a work that is worth your time. And coming at it from that perspective of I want to, engage and delve into art in a really complex manner, especially when it comes to pushing a language to see where this language can go, there's nothing better than Finnegan's Wake, in my opinion. Let's talk about some recommendations that I have about Finnegan's Wake. I don't think any of these novels really come up to the threshold of Finnegan's Wake and what is being done with the experimentation of language. But there's a few that might sort of scratch that experimental itch for our readers out there that might also be a little bit more understandable. Let's start with one that is going to be very, very important for folks, and that is At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien. Flann O'Brien is another Irish novelist, and I think that this is another one of those really complicated Irish texts that to me, I really do think merits a good read. There's a lot of language playing here, and it definitely fits into this tradition of Joyce's Ulysses and Joyce's Finnegans Wake. So At Swim Two Birds, I think, is well worth everybody's while. The rest of my recommendations are going to be more experimenting with form and language in a different way. But there's one I want to talk about first that I think a lot of folks I see on Instagram are referencing. And I'm not necessarily encouraging you to read this, but I think it is another text that does meet a certain threshold of experimentation that if you really love Finnegan's Wake, you might consider looking into. And that is Zettles Traum by Arno Schmidt, or what is also translated into the English as Bottom's Dream. Now, I will say this, and I've said this on the videos, and I'm going to keep saying it. S. Fischer Verlag and Surkamp Verlag both need to put out a cheaper version of this. This is going to be over 200 euros. Every single edition is going to be gigantic. You're never going to find a paperback version of this, and that is a huge error on behalf of these publishers. So join me, and every time you interact with S. Fischer Verlag or Surkamp Verlag saying, we need a smaller and cheaper version of Zettles Traum. It is unacceptable how expensive this thing is. I've been on this for over a decade, trying to convince them to do this, and to no avail. But I will show you the book anyways, in the off chance that perhaps one day this will be made more affordable. If ever it is more affordable, then it gets my full recommendation here. Right now I'm just highlighting it, and I'm not going to recommend it because I don't think you spending more than 200 euros on a novel is acceptable. But let's just take a look at the inside of the text here, and you might see why some of this is similar to Finnegan's Wake, because it is a very particular sort of typesetting here. And it is a very complex novel. I don't know, to my taste, in having read portions of it in the original German, I don't know that this is getting to the point of Finnegan's Wake in how the language is experimented with. But I do think that, it is one of the most complicated novels out there. So if we ever see a smaller version of Zettles Traum, or Bottom's Dream as it is translated into the English, then it has my full recommendation. For those of you who are able to afford it and you have the money to do so, by all means. I don't think, for me, this is the most expensive book I've ever bought. I'm not big on, you see, I'm even struggling to even get it into the box. I'm not going to annotate this. This is not going to be a book that I write in. It's an heirloom. It's very special. Surkamp and S. Fischer Verlag, they could publish a smaller version of it. and make that more accessible. They don't, and right now it is pretty much relegated to academic circles. It's unfortunate, but if you're working at one of those publishing houses, contact me. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about doing a smaller version. It needs to happen. And the last three recommendations I have here, experiment significantly with form, and I think that they are well worth your time because they also might be really challenging to you. The first one is by Asia Jabbar, Fantasia and Algerian Cavalcade. And this novel is super duper cool. It experiments with memoir and history and narrative telling. And this is just a really complex and beautiful novel that I think is really worthy of a good read. This has been translated from the Arabic by Dorothy Blair. And I think the translation is very good. Another novel that I think is really fun and also plays with form and plays a little bit with language is going to be Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. This is another one. It's a poem that has annotations to it, and you can read it in multiple ways. And I think that this plays with form a little bit, and this is going to get, like Fantasia and Algerian Cavalcade, this is going to have, a little bit of that experimentation that's going to be exciting for you. Neither of these works to the extent that Joyce does play with sort of intertextuality or language. There is a lot of that in At Swim Two Birds in terms of playing with the language. But I think you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody outside of Joyce who is doing the kind of language play that Joyce does. One final recommendation I have here that plays with form and it has a lot of intertextual reference is going to be Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar, which to my mind, this along with Pale Fire is one of the source books for Infinite Jest in terms of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest having that sort of bouncing back and forth structure. And not only does this have a unique structure and a unique language, the translation's very good, but also it has a lot of that intertextuality in terms of the references. There's a ton of literary references in Hopscotch. Overall, look, Finnegan's Wake, I think, is a worthy and exciting read. This is definitely something that, I want to encourage more folks to give this a read because it is so exciting sometimes when you're reading this and you're completely lost, you're completely befuddled, you have no idea what's going on. And then that glimmer of, some bit of the text that is discernible to you comes through. I think that is really exciting. I think that's really, I was really eager when I was going throughout all of it. If there was a section that was particularly difficult to me, I was really eager to get to that point where it's like, oh, this is really understandable all of a sudden. I'm having, a much better time with that. To me, that was really exciting. I will say this, it took me probably about 250 pages to warm up on the reading. And once I got through probably section 2.2 in the second book, the second chapter, I got into a much better position, and I wasn't sure. Frequently with a lot of novels, you have to learn how to read it. You have to learn how the author is going to allow you to get something out of this text, right? And I was not sure if I was going to get to a point with Finnegan's Wake where I was, understanding everything that was going on, and I didn't. I also wasn't sure if I was going to get to a place where I was having an easy time of reading it, where I had gotten to a point of being able to read this in a discernible manner. And I did get there. I did finally, after about 200 or 300 pages, got into a good flow with the reading where I established a good sense of what was going on in terms of how the language play worked, and I was able to get a lot out of it. And that was really helpful. I think it's definitely a confounding text, and it will be, and I don't think it will ever be authoritatively read, and that's okay. I think it's totally fine. I think there's plenty of novels that don't intend for you to understand everything, and Finnegan's Wake might be up at the top of that list. that doesn't mean that it's not worth a read. So if you've stuck with me through this video, I want you to comment down below and let me know if you're going to read it, or if you have read it, or if you've tried. Let me know. Please, I want to encourage you to give it a shot. Even if you're doing what I have been doing over the last 10 years and just pulling it off the shelf occasionally and reading some of it out, out loud or just in your head, I think it's so worthy of that. Just as an accomplishment of language, if you've studied linguistics, if you've studied the history of language, or the history of the English language, for example, or if you're familiar with, if you're fluent in another language, I think Joyce's Finnegansweb can be really fun, because you start to see all those little, plays on language that maybe you were learning about when you were studying language. Definitely something to consider there. So let me know, are you going to read this text? Have you read it? What's your feeling here? I hope that I did a sufficient job of demystifying this text. Being able to demystify Finnegansweb is a reductive task in and of itself, of course. But I do think that it is able to be approached if you know a little bit of background about the text. I think this is one of those novels that checking out some of those resources, it can be really worthy. And maybe if you're not the kind of reader who uses annotations frequently, maybe this can be one of those first times where you sort of work on using some outside resources to it. And I don't want to say that using annotations in your reading is not necessarily scholarly. This is just you delving into the text in a deeper way and engaging in a discourse. Just like with Joseph Campbell here, Campbell makes wrong assumptions about the text, and that's commented on in A Skeleton Key. And I think, reading annotations to any text is really helpful. It's really helpful just in the excitement that you get to learn more, and you get to engage with somebody else and their read on a text, which I think is the most important thing to me about reading annotations. Is when I'm engaging in a complicated text, I want to be able to say, hey, what did other people think about this? What did other people learn from this? What questions were they asking? And Finnegansweb is a perfect text to do that with, because everybody who's reading it is perplexed. Every single person who's reading this novel is having that same moment that you're having of saying, what on earth is going on this page? And that, I think, going back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this video, is really egalitarian. That to me means Finnegansweb is for everybody. If nobody understands it, then everybody's coming at it from this perspective of ignorance, and that, I think, is really awesome. I just think it's really, really fantastic to be able to say, hey, I'm going to try and read this. This person was experimenting with language, and they created this really, really interesting piece. Your reading is your reading. And this is one of those few novels that you can, really gain something out of it that maybe nobody else has ever gained before in your own personal reading. It's a doozy, folks. And let me say, it takes a while to read. 600 pages might be a lot for some readers in terms of length. It's certainly not the longest novel out there. But 600 pages of a novel like this, if you are obsessing over every single line, is going to take you years. If you are going line by line here and you're saying, I need to understand everything the fullest extent as possible, you're using Finnegansweb, maybe you're using Skeleton Key or some other scholarly resources, it's going to take you years. Unless you don't have, anything else to do in life besides sit and read, Finnegansweb. It's going to take you years. So give yourself some grace. And hey, this is a novel that's worth a reread. I'm not going to stop pulling it off the shelf and reading it. I think that is something that I will continue to do because I'm just so fascinated by it, and I've really enjoyed that. And I think, for my fellow writers out there, if you're somebody you're stuck in your writing space and you're not really sure where to go in a literary sense, with your next work, you're working on a manuscript or a short story and you're not really sure where to take it. I wouldn't be dismissive of Finnegansweb. I would look at it as a resource to sort of remind us as writers where we can go with the language, and to what extent we can take a language is a really important thing that every writer needs to think about. I don't care what you write. You need to be, engaged in that discourse of what is this thing that we're using to create art? And language can get really complicated, and it can be like Finnegan's Wake is. It can be like this, where it is so deeply complicated that it is confounding. And sometimes it should be that way. I think that is true too. I think Finnegan's Wake should be the way that it is. I loved that I didn't know what was going on. I loved that there was so much language play that I could delve into one line on one page and sit there and think about it for days on end. And then I also just love, experiencing art. That's something that I think is really important for us. And, when it comes to understanding the sort of critical tradition of, the novel, I think, Finnegan's Wake is an important part of that. So let me know, do you foresee yourself reading this? Have you tried to read it? Are you going to try and read it? What's going to be your strategy here? Because I'm really curious. I'm really excited to engage more folks on Finnegan's Wake. I think it's such a great novel. There's folks out there who are going to be like, it's not a novel. It's just nonsense, and that's fine. You know what? I can see where you're coming from on that. To me, it was a worthy and exciting read. The 2.5 months I spent reading this text were a fun 2.5 months. I feel like I got a good bit from it. So I want to thank you folks for being here with me today and delving through one of the most infamous novels maybe of all time. If you want to learn more about me, you should visit my website, georgekors.com, or you can follow me on socials at gbk7288. And I kept mentioning that I'm a novelist, but yes, you should read my novel, Always the Wanderer. You have my eternal gratitude when you do. It's also a really experimental text. Joyce has been a huge influence on me over the last 15 years. And I think if you like Joyce, you'll love Always the Wanderer. So thank you so much again for spending some time with me today. I hope this was a helpful video, and I hope that you watch some more of my videos. Please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful and safe day, everybody. Thank you so much.